All right. Good evening, everybody. All right. I'm glad we have a few more in our ranks tonight than we did last night. So good work bringing a friend. So we're still a small group, though. So I think we can still have it be somewhat informal. I'm gonna present, but if you guys want to raise your hand and interrupt me with questions, that'd be just fine. So tonight we're going to talk about dinosaurs. Before we get there, though, just so if you didn't hear last night about our ministry, we are Creation Ministries International. We've been around for nearly 50 years, and we exist to show people that the book of Genesis tells us the truth about history, that it contains information that God revealed about the origin of all things, how the universe came to be, how plants and animals and people came to be, how sin and death as a consequence entered the world as well. All that is told in the early chapters of Genesis. And we have many PhD scientists on staff who analyze the scientific information and then show how real science fits with the Bible. These two things are not in conflict. We also have some resources that can equip you and answer your questions about creation and evolution and defend Genesis as history. We have a website, it's creation.com, a great place to learn a lot more. We've got a fantastic email newsletter as well that comes out about once per week, and we don't sell your information to anybody else. If you want to sign up for this, it's totally free. Some of you were here last night, and we already passed these around, but I put the clipboards that are in your seats. If you just want to take advantage of that, all you have to do is fill in one of those boxes with your name, your email address, and your zip code, and I'll collect them all again at the end, and then you'll receive our free email newsletter. But in speaking of this subject of dinosaurs, here we are in a church sanctuary, right? And we're talking about dinosaurs. I think for many Christians that sounds odd to be covering a topic like dinosaurs in a church. Doesn't that belong in school rather than church? But in church, we should learn truth about the world, and I think it is important for Christians to understand the subject of dinosaurs, because do you realize much of the world sees dinosaurs as a problem for Christians? Believe it or not, they think because they say dinosaurs are proof of evolution, dinosaurs are proof that the world is millions of years old, much older than Genesis teaches when it talks about creation in 6 days and a world made just a few thousand years ago. They see dinosaurs as scientific proof that Christianity is not true. In fact, this stood out to me years ago when I was driving home from work one day. The car in front of me had this decal on the bumper. So notice, without even using any words on their bumper sticker, this person has a dinosaur, a T-Rex, depicted, and he's eating this fish. And what does the fish represent? It represents somebody who believes in Jesus, a symbol of being a Christian. So you might have one of these Jesus fish on your car, but this person, why would he put a dinosaur eating the Jesus fish? Because he believes dinosaurs are a problem for Christians. He thinks the very existence of dinosaurs means that Christianity is not true. And why would someone think that? Well, because again, the story that the world tells about dinosaurs doesn't seem to agree with Genesis. We're always told dinosaurs lived millions of years ago, long before mankind. And we're told that dinosaurs evolved from other reptiles, and then birds evolved from dinosaurs. And so dinosaurs are supposed to be this icon of evolution. But what I want to show you this evening is that we can understand dinosaurs from a biblical perspective, and there's really not a problem here. When we look at the scientific evidence, we can see how it actually aligns with the biblical account. So I'll fill in those details as we move on, but the basic idea here, I think, is to build our thinking on the scripture and then see how it can make sense of dinosaurs. So developing a Christian worldview is kind of like putting on a pair of glasses. So I see some of you guys have your glasses on, and I myself have my contact lenses in right now. So just like wearing glasses, if I took my contacts out, I could not see far away. Like at the back of the room, you guys would just be a blurry picture. I couldn't tell who was who in the back. I can't see far away. But my first year of college, I was already wearing glasses back then, and I lived in this dorm room. This is actually my dorm room at college. I was up on the second story, and I had a window right beside my bed. And normally, if I looked out my window with my glasses on, I would see down one story to the campus below. There was a beautiful, well-kept lawn, some tall trees on my college campus. There was a creek in the distance, kind of a nice picture outside my window. But one particular morning, I happened to wake up, and I don't sleep with my glasses on. I don't sleep with my glasses on, so I happened to glance out the window before I got my glasses that morning. And you know what I saw? Something very strange. The ground, I could see the green grass, just blurry picture. Remember, I couldn't see it well, just blurry, but the ground was moving up and down like this. And I squinted and stared, and I said, how can the ground be moving up and down? I don't feel the building shaking. This is no earthquake. How can the ground move? I couldn't figure it out until I went and got my glasses. So as soon as I put my glasses on, now it was really obvious what was really happening. It turns out I sleep really heavy, and it rained during the night a lot while I was sleeping. So much rain that it flooded the creek nearby, and so the water rose up and covered the lawn right up to the building's foundation. This was actually a flood, and wind was blowing on the surface of the water and making it ripple. So it wasn't really the ground that was moving, it was a flood. So our glasses can be really important in helping us to see the world as it truly is. And I want to make a case that the Bible should be understood the same way. If we put on biblical glasses, that means we use the Bible to help us understand the world, and then we'll see things that we wouldn't have seen without the Bible, without those set of biblical glasses to help us understand every part of reality and how all things came to be as Genesis describes. And so the Bible can even help us to understand a subject like dinosaurs, believe it or not. So everyone put on your biblical glasses, right? Kids can do this. But what I really mean is to learn the Bible really well to help us understand the world, to see it correctly. And when we do that, can we understand dinosaurs? Well, you don't have to know the Bible to answer this question, but the kids can help me out. What's the name of this dinosaur? Triceratops. Very good. He's got 3 horns on his face, and tri means 3, right? So it's the Triceratops. But the more challenging question that we do need to think about biblically is, when did God make Triceratops? Did God make Triceratops millions of years ago? Did he make Triceratops during Creation Week? Well, a good place to begin learning about dinosaurs from the Bible, even though the word Triceratops doesn't show up, is the 10 Commandments. She can ask a question. Go ahead. What's your question? You mean the full name of Triceratops? Yeah, I think ceratops, I can't remember. Does anybody know what the rest of it means? I want to say maybe it has to do with the face, like 3 or horns or something like that. I'll have to look it up. That's a good question. Maybe we can Google that later. I forget what the full name means. I know that what the names of some other dinosaurs mean, like Pachycephalosaurus. Have you guys ever heard of that dinosaur? Pachycephalosaurus. That one has a funny name. It's the one with like a big bony skull, right? And they would actually like ram their heads into other dinosaurs. And that one means thick-headed lizard. So cephalo is head. Pachycephalosaurus. Anyway, Triceratops. All right. But as I say, if we go to the 10 Commandments, believe it or not, that's a good place to begin thinking about dinosaurs from the Bible, because in the 4th commandment, God told the Israelites to work for 6 days and then rest on the Sabbath, right? That was their pattern. Work for 6 days, then rest for 1. And why? Well, because this verse tells us, in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and he rested on the 7th day, which this verse also later calls the Sabbath day. So that tells you the days of Creation Week are ordinary days there compared to the Israelite work week. Just as God took 6 days, he rested on the Sabbath, you do the same exact thing God told the people of Israel. But notice this verse says that God made everything within those 6 days. There was no age of millions of years before that creation week of 6 days. God made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and all that is in them. Wouldn't that include even the dinosaurs if we're just starting from Scripture and building our thinking on God's Word rather than taking outside ideas and imposing that on the Bible? And which day would Triceratops have been made in particular? If he's made during creation week, during those 6 days, you go back to Genesis 1, that's where it tells you which things God made on which days. And here in verse 25, it says God made the beasts of the earth, according to their kinds, the livestock, and he made the creeping things. These are all the land animals it's talking about here. So when did God make the land animals? It's between days 5 and 7, if you need a hint. Day 6, right? Day 6 is when God made the land creatures. So there, I've actually illustrated with these cartoons, you can see what God made on the different days. Plants, dry land made on day 3, for example. Sun, moon, and stars made on day 4. Swimming creatures and flying creatures made on the 5th day. But God made the land animals on day 6, according to Genesis chapter 1. Now, who else did God make on day 6, according to Genesis chapter 1? You know it? Yeah, they're waving at you right there, right? So you had a hint. But you probably knew that anyway. Yep, the first 2 people were made on the same day as the land animals. So again, if we're putting on our biblical glasses, starting from Scripture without outside ideas influencing us, we would work out the logic that dinosaurs were made at the same time as people. Now, I know how that's a radical new idea. For many people in our culture, we've been taught that dinosaurs and humans were separated by millions of years. So later on, we'll look at the science and see which point of view is the right one. But for right now, we're just putting on our biblical glasses to see what the Bible can teach us about dinosaurs. Without even using the word dinosaur, we just use simple logic. You know, if you wondered, when did God make kangaroos? You would say, well, a kangaroo is a land animal. God made land animals on day 6, therefore kangaroos were made on day 6. It's the same with the dinosaurs like Triceratops. All right, so kids, again, help me out. What's the name of this dinosaur? Yeah, Tyrannosaurus Rex. I think even the adults knew that one, most likely, right? Because that's maybe the most famous dinosaur. And his name, I know what it means. Any of the kids know what it means? What is it? That's the word dinosaur means terrible lizard, but you're close. Saur means lizard, but tyranno means tyrant, which is like a kind of a mean, tough king. So he's the tyrant lizard, and Rex means king also. So Tyrannosaurus Rex means tyrant lizard king, kind of a big, mean, scary king, right? He's the king of all the creatures because he's so big. All right, but what did Tyrannosaurus eat when he was first made? Was he a meat eater? You might think so because that's what we're usually told, but in Genesis chapter 1, all the animals, God said, to every beast of the earth, to every bird of the heavens, and everything that creeps on the earth with the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food. So even these scary-looking dinosaurs, when God first made the world, everything was a plant eater. And only later did creatures begin to eat meat. Even the dinosaurs, therefore, again, if we're just putting on our biblical glasses and working out the logic, we'll see some scientific evidence for this later on as we go. But I would argue even the dinosaurs in the Garden of Eden, when they looked at the lunch menu, were they thinking about a Brachiosaurus burger or a mammoth steak? No, they dined at the salad bar exclusively. Now you might say, how could that be true? Because look at the teeth on a Tyrannosaurus Rex. They're thin and they're curved backwards and they're very sharp. And they're even, the backside has a serrated edge. That's like a bumpy edge, jagged like a steak knife. You guys know what a steak knife looks like with that jagged edge? A really sharp knife that you cut through your steak with? Not like a butter knife, but it's got a sharp edge with a sawtooth blade. That's how the teeth are on a Tyrannosaurus Rex. So you might say, well, clearly those teeth are designed for eating meat, right? Well, not necessarily. I think it's true that by looking at teeth and their shape, you can tell what sort of job God designed them for. Like molars that we have in the back of our mouths, those are designed for grinding up food, right? And teeth like this are not designed for grinding. They're designed for slashing and tearing and pulling off, whatever the food is that he's eating. But you know what? There are a lot of tough plants out there in the world. Just because an animal has sharp teeth doesn't prove that he was a meat eater. Sharp teeth can be used for eating plants as well. And think about when you do cut up like an apple in the kitchen, do you use a dull knife or a spoon or a fork? No, you use a sharp knife to cut through an apple. Even though it's a soft fruit, sharp objects are useful for cutting into plants. There are other animals we have in the world today, like this creature here, that have very sharp teeth as well. Razor sharp back teeth. He's got front fangs. Do you see them like big daggers extending down? That looks pretty scary, right? How would you like to meet this animal some evening in the dark? maybe in a dark cave. Well, you don't want to meet him, but do you want to guess what animal this skull belongs to? What is it? Coyote? Nope. Good guess. Saber-toothed tiger? Nope. Any other guesses? Aha, somebody said bat. It does happen to be the skull of a bat, but what kind of bat? Particularly a fruit bat. Oh, now you think about what he eats, it wouldn't be so scary to meet him in a dark cave, right? Maybe you don't like bats anyway, but it's a fruit bat. He only eats fruit, and so just because he has sharp teeth doesn't demonstrate that he is a meat eater. It's the same thing with the dinosaurs in the world that God originally made. Now later on we do see dinosaurs in the fossil record. It shows some of them, like T-Rex, were meat eaters. We can tell that from the fossils. Sometimes T-Rex teeth are embedded in the bones of other dinosaurs. Sometimes these dinosaurs, inside their rib cages, inside their stomachs, buried inside them was a fossil of a creature they ate. So it's clear that some dinosaurs did eat meat, but the majority never did. Actually, most dinosaurs were plant eaters. Now, there are other stories that we've talked about in Creation magazine, for example, this lion. Now, scientists classify lions as meat eaters, but this female lion grew up on a farm, and her human owners thought, well, cats have to have meat as a part of their diet. So when this lioness was a cub, they tried to give her meat, and she refused it. For some reason, she didn't want to eat any meat. And they were feeding her milk from a bottle at the time, and they just put a few drops of blood in her milk bottle to try to get her accustomed to it, to wean her onto a meat diet. And even the blood, she could smell it in the milk, and she refused to drink the milk then. So eventually they gave in, and they said, okay, you don't want to eat meat, we'll do something different. Now, they didn't feed her only plants, but they gave her a diet of cooked grains and raw eggs, and she continued to drink milk and just chewed on rubber boots to keep her gums healthy. And she did just fine. So she lived for 9 years, which is a decent amount of time for a large cat. Now, even if that's kind of a fluke, a weird kind of oddity in the world today, it shows that it is possible for even creatures we call meat eaters, carnivores, to live without eating meat. And that shows that what Genesis teaches is quite reasonable, that there was a change in the world. Initially, God gave plants to eat, but after sin and death entered the world, then God's curse on the ground transformed much of the world. Now again, the world usually says, no, that can't be right, and they always portray dinosaurs as though they were millions of years ago fighting one another in the struggle for survival, always eating and battling each other. But the minute we say, if we accept that idea, the world's view of dinosaurs that says these dead dinosaur bones died out millions of years ago, then that actually presents a problem for Bible-believing Christians. So it's not dinosaurs themselves, but this view of dinosaurs presents a problem, because if dinosaurs died millions of years ago, that means death was here long before Adam and Eve. But how does the Bible say death came into the world? It describes the Garden of Eden in the beginning, and after God had finished making the whole world with the plants and the animals and the sun, moon, stars, and the first two people, Adam and Eve, after God finished making Adam and Eve, it says at the end of Genesis chapter 1, God looked on all that he had made and saw that it was very good. When God calls the world very good, prior to Adam and Eve's sin, were the dinosaurs already eating one another, and there was death and things dying and going extinct millions of years before Adam and Eve? No, the Bible says Adam and Eve were there from the beginning of creation, and the world was initially very good without animals and people killing each other. There was no death initially. Yes, ma'am? Are they meat? Yeah, they're animals. They have meat inside them, right? Just like when you eat a chicken at home. I don't know if you eat chicken, but that comes from a real bird, a chicken walking around, right? It has meat in his bones. Meat is basically muscles.
So that means we have meat?
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's right. In a sense, yeah. You have meat inside you, yep. All right, good question. All right, so to kind of illustrate the absurdity of that position from a biblical perspective at least, to believe that Genesis teaches that the world was already millions of years old and dinosaurs lived long before Adam and Eve, that would put the fossil record underneath the Garden of Eden. Is that the world that God called very good, already filled with dead fossil bones millions of years worth of death. Not at all. Death is a consequence of Adam and Eve's sin. Initially, the world was good, and only after Adam and Eve disobeyed their Creator did God curse the ground. Even the New Testament says that, how did sin and death come into the world? Because of the actions of Adam. In Romans 5, it says, therefore, just as sin came into the world through one man, and death through sin, so death spread to all men, because all sinned. Now, this verse specifically talks about human death, but even that is a problem because for this idea that the world is millions of years old, because we find human skeletons deep down in these fossil layers as well. But the Bible says Adam brought death into the world. It says man came first and death came after. But the other view of history, evolution, says death came first and man came after. And so these stories are really polar opposites. So notice so far we haven't looked so much at the scientific evidence, but just at what the Bible outlines as far as dinosaurs go, right? We put on our biblical glasses, and we've seen that dinosaurs would have been created alongside Adam and Eve on day 6. They were plant eaters in the beginning and only turned to meat eating after sin and death entered the world. Now, if that's true, what about later times in the Bible's history, in the time of Noah? If dinosaurs were still around, were they aboard Noah's Ark? Well, not too many Christian books on Noah's flood portray dinosaurs aboard the Ark, but I think there's good scientific reasons to believe dinosaurs were still alive at the time of the flood. We'll talk about that in a minute. And if dinosaurs were still around then I believe Noah had to take dinosaurs on board because they were land-dwelling, air-breathing animals, and God told Noah to take 2 of every type of land-dwelling, air-breathing creature on board. He didn't have to build aquariums for the sea creatures. They could survive a flood outside the ark, but the birds and the land animals came on board. Now you might say, how could that be true? How can you fit giant dinosaurs on board one boat, along with all the other animals in the whole world? Well, if you're anything like me, you might have grown up in a church that had something like this painted on the nursery wall. Anybody seen a Noah's Ark that looked like that before? A cute little bathtub-shaped ark, right? It's kind of overcrowded, like packed way too many animals, squeezed on there really tight, and giraffes' necks are sticking out the top, and everyone is smiling even though the world is being destroyed. Well, I'm glad we want to teach children truths about the Bible, but I think we ought to be careful and not show the ark that looks like that, because does that look like a real boat that could survive a worldwide flood? It looks like a fairy tale, doesn't it? It doesn't look real. And if you put even one big dinosaur on board that kind of ark, it's going to sink the whole ship, isn't it? That doesn't make very much sense. But does the Bible say Noah's Ark was a little tiny overcrowded bathtub? No, the Bible says Noah's Ark was enormous. Here's what God said to Noah in Genesis 6. God is speaking, and he said, Noah, this is how you are to make the ark. The length of the ark, 300 cubits. Wow. Do you appreciate how enormous the true ark really was, or do you first have to know what a cubit is? Do you know what it is? No? Okay. Anybody? A cubit? It's about the length of a man's, Aaron knows in the back. There you go. A man's forearm is a cubit from elbow to fingertip. So on average today, that's around 1.5 feet in our measurements. In ancient times, they had different standardized cubit lengths, just like we use what we call a foot today is like 12 inches, right? But that's about the length of somebody's foot. That's where that idea came from. Just like a cubit came from this, but we have an exact cubit length that Noah probably would have used. But there were different ones in ancient times, so we don't know for sure exactly how long the ark was, but something like 1.5 feet times 300 gives you an ark that looks like this, about 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, 45 feet tall, and there's a couple of people to scale to show you, wow, that's a really big boat, isn't it? A lot bigger than an overcrowded bathtub. So can you fit big animals on board a boat like that? Absolutely. You can fit lots and lots of creatures. In fact, at this size, Noah's Ark had about the same volume, the same space, as 522 freight train stock cars. And these types of cars, train cars, are designed to house several hundred sheep-sized animals on one car, believe it or not. And granted, that'd be packing them on there pretty tight. I think on board the ark they surely had a little bit more room to roam around. I think the animals in their cages or what have you. But that just shows there's lots and lots of space aboard the true ark. So we've seen that the Bible says Noah's ark was really big, but still some people might say the dinosaurs were also really big. So even with a giant ark, is Noah still going to have some difficulty fitting these big dinosaurs aboard? Especially if he had to take 2 of every single type of dinosaur. Well, let's think about the size of dinosaurs for a minute. I've got another dinosaur with me. Kids, tell me, what is the name of this dinosaur? Stegosaurus. Very good. Somebody knows their dinosaurs. All right. Now, this toy Stegosaurus that I own, he's only about a foot long. Okay, there he is compared to a ruler. How many of you think that this represents a life-sized version of the mighty Stegosaurus that once roamed the earth? Anybody think this is to scale? Life-sized Stegosaurus? Well, guess what? This could be a life-sized version of the mighty Stegosaurus when he first hatched out of his egg. Okay, now I think, to be fair, I've cheated because this is clearly not meant to be a baby. It's meant to be an adult Stegosaurus with plates and spikes already grown out. But my point is that even the biggest dinosaurs, like Stegosaurus or bigger ones still, they all started out small because they came from eggs. And did you know scientists have found many dinosaur eggs all around the world? Here are some dinosaur eggs. Most dinosaur eggs are smaller than an American football. The biggest dinosaur eggs that have ever been found are about twice that length, but a bit skinnier than a football. So even the biggest dinosaur eggs are only something like that long maybe, right? And so all the dinosaurs started out small. Now we don't know for sure if Noah took small, young dinosaurs aboard the ark or if he took full-grown ones, but it would kind of make sense because you'd save space if you take the little ones. Maybe not babies, but maybe young dinosaurs and young other creatures, then they would take up a lot less room on board the ark. And by the way, we can also tell from looking at growth patterns in dinosaur bones, just like if you look at the rings on a tree, you can see some years the rings are thicker, and that means the tree grew faster, right? Same thing with dinosaur bones. And looking at the way dinosaurs grew based on their bone rings, some of the biggest dinosaurs called the sauropods, like Apatosaurus, Diplodocus, or Brachiosaurus, you might know. Those are all sauropod dinosaurs, the ones with long necks and long tails. Those got to be the biggest dinosaurs of all. But they underwent a growth spurt in their adolescent years. So they started out small, and then before they got to be teenagers, they grew really fast, just like that same thing happens to human beings, right? So you don't want to bring really old dinosaurs like Grandpa and Grandma Dinosaur onto the ark. Noah wouldn't have done that. Why? Because after the flood is over, the dinosaurs have to repopulate the world and have baby dinosaurs. They have to be young enough that they can still have babies and not be really, really old dinosaurs. So that's another reason why Noah might have brought younger dinosaurs on board. But even when dinosaurs were full grown, it turns out not all the dinosaurs got to be huge. Many of the sauropods did, but others, like, I don't know if you've heard of this dinosaur called Compsognathus. That's a little screenshot from those Jurassic Park movies. That's not meant to be a baby dinosaur. That is a full-grown dinosaur. That's how big Compsognathus was. So either he's not so enormous, or that is a very large and terrifying girl, right? But it turns out some dinosaurs, when they were full-grown, were the size of a chicken. And so if Noah brought young dinosaurs or even dinosaurs like Compsognathus on board the ark, then they could have sat in his lap with no problem. So overall, even though some dinosaurs were big, others were little, and so you average it out, the average size of a dinosaur is only about as big as a pony. Not as big as many people might have imagined. So we've considered 2 things about dinosaurs on the ark, the size of the ark and the size of the dinosaurs. But there's one more thing we want to think about. If Noah took dinosaurs on board, how many individual dinosaurs did he have to take? He took a male and a female of every dinosaur kind, but notice the Bible doesn't say he took 2 of every single species. Now, when you look at groups of dinosaurs, like one group we call Ceratopsia, do you think that this represents many kinds of dinosaurs, or is it one kind of dinosaur? They all look similar, right? Could they be cousins, close relatives, with different hairstyles, if you will, right? Different horn configurations that you see there. I believe this is just one kind of dinosaur. It's variations on a theme, just like all the people in the world today are one kind. We are all human beings. We all go back to just a single pair of ancestors. We started from Adam and Eve only thousands of years ago, and yet we have lots of differences in skin shades and eye colors and blood types and hair textures and so on and so forth. But we're all human beings. And so creation scientists looking at this question of how many dinosaur kinds ever existed believe Ceratopsia just represents one kind. And when you total it up, all the different types of dinosaurs, there's maybe 700 different species named today. But within each dinosaur kind, you can sometimes have many species. And so it looks like only about 60 different basic types of dinosaurs, according to the biblical concept of a biblical kind. Not a super technical term, but we can kind of compare that to our modern scientific classification and see that a kind is a broader category that can contain many individual species. So the point of talking about that is that Noah didn't have to bring hundreds and hundreds of dinosaurs on board the ark, just 60 times 2, because you need a male and a female of each kind. That's about 120 dinosaurs on the ark. Now, if all that's correct, again, if dinosaurs went onto the ark at the beginning of the flood, then they would have come off the ark at the end of Noah's flood. And so there's the evidence that dinosaurs survived the flood. We have this photograph of, I don't know what kind of dinosaur that is. Doesn't really look like a dinosaur, does it? A silly lizard. But before we talk about the world after Noah's flood, let's think about the individual dinosaurs alive at the time of Noah's flood. Their representative kinds went on board, but there were surely other creatures, other dinosaurs around outside the ark. What would have happened to those dinosaurs? They would have drowned, right? And not only would they have drowned from the flood waters covering the whole planet, but the flood was catastrophic. If you actually had water surrounding the globe, the moon would still cause the tides of the water to go up and down because the moon pulls on the water using gravity. And so the water goes up and down, the tides are caused by the moon, and with no continents to stop them, that water is going to race and slosh around. It's going to erode rock and sediment and redeposit it elsewhere, and it's going to bury all kinds of creatures. So it turns out, I believe, Noah's flood is the best explanation for why we find dinosaur fossils around the world. It's not that the dinosaurs lived and died millions of years ago, it's that a worldwide flood happened and buried many of these creatures, including dinosaurs, all at once. So the fossil record, I don't think, is good evidence for millions of years. It's rather good evidence that there was a global flood. So let's come to the scientific evidence then and look at some of the details of the rock record and see if it really does show dinosaurs being buried catastrophically in a watery disaster. Sometimes when we look at where dinosaurs are buried in different places around the world, we find what are called fossil graveyards. A fossil graveyard is when you have a whole bunch of bones from sometimes different types of creatures all jumbled up. How did the bones get all jumbled up and transported and then deposited? It would take something really strong to move all these types of animals and mix all their bones up, right? Especially the bones from sauropod dinosaurs like you find at Dinosaur National Monument. You also find logs, like tree logs, buried in these same layers that you can see for yourself if you go visit this park there, Dinosaur National Monument in Utah. And the dinosaurs are buried with other types of creatures, some freshwater clams and snails and reptiles and mammals and birds as well. And so it looks like that points to a watery catastrophe. Now, there are other times where we don't just find, individual bones and a big jumbled mess. We find very complete dinosaur skeletons, and the bones are mostly intact. So you can see the positions they had in their bodies. There's a couple of long-necked dinosaurs buried inside the rock, and we didn't even remove the rock entirely or take the bones out of the rock. So you could see even the position of their limbs and their necks and their tails. But do you see how in these two pictures, and there are many, many more creatures with long necks in the fossil record buried like this, their necks are arched backwards. Looks very awkward, right? Like no animal would like sleep in that position or walk around with their heads pointed up to the sky. Why are creatures with long necks, like dinosaurs and birds and other creatures in the fossil record, why are they buried with their heads pointed backwards? Well, there were some scientists that got curious about that very thing, and what they did is an experiment with chickens. Chickens also have kind of long necks, and they don't have any living dinosaurs today to do the experiment with. So these scientists, instead, they took some dead chickens. These were chickens that were killed, and then they filled up big buckets with cool, fresh water, and then they put the dead chickens down in the water and just let them float, and then they stood back and watched what happened. So this is a great experiment that maybe some homeschool families might want to try out this coming week and see if you can get the same results. No, I'm just teasing about that. But guess what happened? Within moments, the chickens, dead chickens floating in the water, their necks began to arch backwards. Now, why was that taking place? Well, the scientists researched more, and they learned that the chickens have a stretchy rubber band-like ligament that runs along their spine, okay? Like the bones in your neck and your back, a rubber band that runs along your spine, their spine. And the purpose of that in chickens is to help hold their heads up high so the muscles don't have to do all their work while they're alive. So it makes it a little bit easier for them to hold their heads upright. But once the chickens die, ordinarily, if they lay on the ground, that rubber band wants to contract and it would pull back the head, except it's too heavy and there's too much friction on the ground. So it doesn't tend to happen on the land, but if you lay the chickens down in water, because it's buoyant, the necks can arch backwards. And so these scientists said, we think the same thing happens with these dinosaurs. They were floating in water, and their necks arched backwards from that ligament before they got buried. It looks like water was involved here too. Or take this example. These two dinosaurs were buried in that position in 3 dimensions. The photograph of the bones is on the left, but then you can see on the right kind of what it would look like when they still had not just the bones, but their tissues as well. All right, so you've got a protoceratops, like a triceratops with no horns, a protoceratops on the left, and he's kind of crouching down and he's biting on the arm, the left arm of a velociraptor. You've heard of velociraptor, right? So it's a velociraptor on the right, and he's laying down on his side, and he's got one leg sticking up in the air. And remember, velociraptors had this sharp toe claw. Guess where he has his toe claw? Right at the neck of the protoceratops. So it looks like these two dinosaurs were in the middle of a battle, fighting each other. When did they die and then just sit there in that fighting position for a few years or decades or centuries waiting to get sediment piled up around them and bury them and turn them to stone? No, if they were sitting there for a long time, the leg would fall down, right? It's not going to be held up there for a long time. It looks like instead what happened is they were fighting, and then catastrophically, suddenly, boom, they got buried very, very quickly and frozen in that position in 3 dimensions, and then scientists just removed the rock from around the fossilized bones. So again, a sudden burial by sediment dumped on them, perhaps by a worldwide flood. Here's another example. A study from Canada investigated these armored dinosaurs we call ankylosaurs. But it turns out a slight majority, about 70% of these dinosaurs are buried upside down. And when these scientists investigated what is it that causes them to be buried upside down, they realized, well, their back is really heavy with all that armor. So if they were floating in water and then a wave tipped them over, or they began to bloat and rot, then the gases would flip them upside down. And then once they're upside down, they're stuck in that position. So again, they believe it's because their center of gravity is different from their center of buoyancy. They believe water was involved in flipping these creatures over. They were floating for a while before they got buried. One last evidence is this trackway, a bunch of fossil footprints from dinosaurs in Texas. And what they found, you can see the type of dinosaurs that left those footprints on the picture, but is it 4 legs that left footprints? No, only the front legs left footprints. And so these scientists said, why don't we see the back legs leaving footprints? These creatures are really heavy. If their front legs are leaving footprints, then their back legs should as well. And so they believe water was involved again. A certain amount of water lifted up the weight of these dinosaurs, so they were kind of swimming, but then moving along by touching the bottom of the land underneath the water and propelling themselves along, kind of doing handstands with water to help them. All right? So those are all secular studies of scientists looking into dinosaurs and seeing how water and catastrophe is often very clearly evident in these dinosaur fossils that we discovered today. It looks like a worldwide flood. Now many say, but how come then, if dinosaurs and man lived together and they were killed at the time of the flood, at least many dinosaurs perished during the flood, that's why we find their fossils today, how come we never find dinosaur fossils and human fossils buried in the same layers? And I think that's a fair question. It does seem like a bit of a mystery from a flood perspective why we don't find dinosaurs and people together. Dinosaurs are buried down in these layers and people are buried up in these layers. So there really is a genuine order to the fossil record. But can a flood perspective explain that? Well, I like to point out that there are many examples of creatures that we know lived at the same time, but they're also separated in the fossil record. So just because you find them in different layers doesn't mean that they lived at different times. Here's a good example of that. This fossil shows a Wallamai pine tree, and at one time scientists thought this tree was extinct, that all of them died out and we have no living Wallamai pine trees today, because they just found them in the fossil record, and they find them in the same layers as dinosaurs. In fact, they said this tree went extinct 90 million years ago. It's never buried together with human beings. Human beings are way up in these layers, and Wallamai pine trees are way down here with dinosaurs. But then, in 1994, which is not that long ago, they discovered living specimens of the Wallamai pine tree in Australia. So is this tree extinct, or has it ever gone extinct? If it's alive today, it's always been alive ever since it came into being, right? And it lives alongside human beings. Here we are with the Wallamai pine tree in the world at the same time right now. And yet, you still never find these trees buried together with people. And one evolutionist, when they found this tree alive, he said, this is just as surprising as finding a dinosaur alive today. Now, it turns out since that time, we have found some more fossils, not of the pine needles or the pine cones from this tree, but just pollen is in more recent rock layers. But even the pollen does not overlap with humans. It comes to as recent a time as 2 million years ago, according to their dating methods. But you find, again, it's a mystery from an evolutionary perspective why we don't find the pine needles and pine cones in any of the layers more recently than 90 million years ago. And so I don't even believe in the millions of years. I think that's a misunderstanding of the fossil record. But do we have any scientific evidence that would suggest that the dinosaur bones themselves were buried more recently? Not millions of years ago, but thousands of years ago? Well, have you heard that scientists have been discovering for the past couple of decades soft tissue from inside dinosaur bones? Here's a sample from a duck-billed dinosaur. Here's a sample from Triceratops. Here's a sample from a Tyrannosaurus rex. And you see those red circles? Those are red blood cells coming from dinosaur bones. In other words, this tissue, this soft tissue from inside their bones, has not turned into stone. It's not become a fossil, but it's also not decayed away. But the laws of physics and chemistry tell us this ought to disintegrate if the bones were really buried 66 million years ago or older. How can we still find these proteins and blood vessels and blood cells and so on, and even DNA, small bits of, not complete DNA, but small bits of dinosaur DNA is now being discovered. So, to summarize what we've been learning to this point, we've said that if we put on our biblical glasses, we would say that dinosaurs didn't live millions of years ago. They were created during creation week, just thousands of years ago, lived alongside people in the beginning, alongside Adam and Eve, for example. They were plant eaters to begin with, only became meat eaters after the time of the fall. Then, because the fossils we see today, I've argued, were buried by Noah's flood, that means dinosaurs were alive at the time of Noah's flood. And if so, that means they were also aboard Noah's Ark, because they were land-dwelling, air-breathing creatures. So that means dinosaurs even survived until after Noah's flood. They didn't go extinct at that time, not completely. So does the Bible say anything about dinosaurs living after Noah's flood? Well, the word dinosaur doesn't appear in the Bible, but did you know that word was only made up in 1841? But we already had the Bible translated into English long before this. The King James translation was in 1611, and nobody had ever heard the word dinosaur at that time. But if what I'm saying is true, and nobody in ancient times called these dinosaurs, but they were aware of them perhaps even after the flood, if you saw one of these creatures for yourself and you couldn't call it a dinosaur, what other word might you use to describe it? Maybe an existing word like, do you have a guess? That's a good one. What was yours? Same? Enormous lizard, that's good, yeah. Did you say something at the back? No? Okay. Well, a lizard is a good one, or how about the word dragon? You ever heard of dragons before? We think of dragons as mythical creatures, but these, just like dragons, are giant reptiles with scary claws and teeth and horns, okay? Maybe they can't do everything dragons can do, but that might be another word you could use to describe them. And could it be that in ancient times people used that word to describe dinosaurs? Interestingly, in the King James translation of the Bible, it uses the English word dragon in Psalm 148, verse 7, for example, and a few other places in the Old Testament. The Hebrew word that is translated in English as dragon is tannin, which is used about 14 times in the Old Testament. Other translations in this psalm, they render it as a sea monster, because this type of tannin, whatever a tannin is, he seems to live in the sea because the word deeps refers to deep ocean water and water under the ground. Yes, what's your question?
Did the water dinosaurs survive halfway, or did they finally die when the water was down?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I do think the flood, because remember I said it eroded away rock and sediment and then buried many creatures, so I think it would have buried both land creatures and sea creatures.
What? Like swimmy? Kind of like swimmy?
Yep.
So like dust of the water wished it around and buried them?
Yep. So yeah, I think it would have buried many of them, but the world is a big place, so many sea creatures would have survived the flood because they can live in water and they can swim away, right? Or they might be in another part of the world where it wasn't as destructive.
Or you could get higher tap air.
You can get what now?
Were there dolphins back then?
There were, yep. All the creatures that God made would have been around. So those are very good questions, yep. But I think just like, I don't think the dinosaurs went completely extinct during the flood. I don't think the sea creatures like this necessarily did either, but maybe, because we don't know how long they lived after the time of the flood. But, and technically, by the way, you mentioned like water dinosaurs. Well, there were giant reptiles that lived in the waters like plesiosaurs and mosasaurs and chronosaurs. And we usually put those in books with dinosaurs, and sometimes we call them dinosaurs. But technically, when a scientist uses the word dinosaur, he's just referring to land animals with legs. So these are technically not dinosaurs. They're just other giant reptiles that died out. Giant lizards, giant reptiles, yep. But they're extinct today, so not like the living lizards that we have. But yeah, other reptiles. Yep. All right, so let me keep going on here. So, all right, yes. Maybe so, although animals can multiply and spread out and fill the world really quickly. And so they might have done that since the flood. But that brings to mind another thought. Since I mentioned that the flood would have buried many sea creatures as well as land creatures, actually, the majority of creatures buried in the fossil record are sea creatures, not land creatures. So we find seashells even on the tops of our highest mountains, believe it or not. So that tells you everybody, no matter whether they believe in creation or evolution, everybody believes that even the mountains, where we have mountains like Mount Everest today, that area used to be underwater. And it's not that the water rose so high that it covered Mount Everest, because that would be really, really high, and there's not enough water in the world to rise that high, but instead, there was no Mount Everest at that time. So creationists say, first, the water covered the ancient mountains, which were not as high, and then it made all kinds of sedimentary layers and buried fossils, and then the mountains got lifted up toward the end of the flood and after the flood. And evolutionists actually believe that same thing. They just believe it took millions of years, but they say there was no mountains there, the waters covered the land, buried all these creatures, and then the mountains got lifted up. So everybody kind of agrees on that point. All right, yes, and one more question.
So, if the sea animals were survived, wouldn't there still, since there's always been water in the world,
Yeah.
wouldn't they still be in the sea today?
Yep, I think they are. Yep, there's plenty of sea creatures in the oceans today, and the world is still mostly covered by water.
Actually, is there still any land dinosaurs?
I don't think any dinosaurs are still alive today because we couldn't have just one or two. There would have to be a large population, otherwise they would quickly go extinct.
Yes. The reason I wonder why there should be some underwater is because they multiply underwater. So
Yep.
they would survive.
Yep. Yeah, and there's lots of secret. I don't think there's any like giant reptiles in the oceans anymore, but there are plenty of amazing sea creatures that survived the flood. Yep. All right. So let me move on so I can finish up here. So many of you might wonder then, I've said that I think the dinosaurs are extinct, so what happened to the dinosaurs? Now the evolutionist theory, I'm sure you've all heard of this idea before, that a meteor slammed into the earth and kicked up dust and gas into the atmosphere and caused a type of nuclear winter, like catastrophic climate change that made many animals go extinct all at the same time. But not all believers in evolution actually even agree that that's how dinosaurs died, because this theory has difficulties. It's confusing why, if that killed many creatures all at the same time, why didn't it kill creatures that would seem to be very weak and vulnerable, like salamanders and frogs? We do find salamanders and frogs buried together in the same layers as dinosaurs, so they clearly existed with dinosaurs, but we still have them around today. They didn't die out and go extinct. So really, evolutionists don't know for sure what happened to the dinosaurs. So I can answer from a biblical perspective what happened to the dinosaurs. Do you guys want to know what happened to them? The answer is they died. And maybe you wanted to know what it was that caused them to go extinct from a biblical glasses point of view. And I think it's a mystery for both creationists and evolutionists. We don't know for sure what caused them to go extinct, but there are lots of reasons animals go extinct all the time. We have the dodo bird and the passenger pigeon and the Tasmanian tiger have all died out, and many other types of creatures. And dinosaurs are another creature like that went extinct, maybe for quite a few reasons, like a predator hunting them, or changes to the climate, or a food source becoming more rare. You know, there's all kinds of reasons that animals go extinct, and so dinosaurs don't need to be a problem just because we don't know the final exact answer. But today, many evolutionists are saying that dinosaurs are not entirely extinct. Did you know the creationists are the ones who say dinosaurs have all died, and the evolutionists say we still have living dinosaurs with us today because they say you have them flying around in your backyard, making nests in the trees. They believe that birds should be understood as one type of dinosaur. But I don't think that's true at all. When they look at a certain type of dinosaur called a theropod, like T-Rex was a big theropod, but there are other little ones, notice the way that they stand on two legs, just like birds. But they believe that the birds evolved from theropods. But there are radical differences between this type of dinosaur and a bird. Birds have a lot of muscles in their arms and their chest so they can flap their wings and fly. But do these dinosaurs look like they have a lot of muscles in their front arms? No, they've got tiny little forearms. And even if you put some feathers on these creatures, they're not going to lift off the ground by doing that, right? Look where they have their muscles, in their hind legs and in their muscular tail. And even birds that have tails, there are some birds in the fossil record that have bony tails, but they're not like these muscular dinosaur tails with processes where the muscles attach. Totally different type of creature. You would need radical changes to turn a dinosaur into a bird, and so only God can make birds. They didn't come from dinosaurs. Here's just one of the obvious differences. Reptiles are covered in scales and birds are covered in feathers. And a feather is not a modified scale. Reptile scales are like a fold in the skin. So if anybody has like a pet snake, when a snake sheds its skin, does one scale pop off at a time? No, the whole sheet comes off. It's all a sheet of skin and the scales are folds. But a feather is more like a hair. It grows through the skin out of a follicle and then unfolds with this complex branching pattern. And look at the main shaft, and then you have branches coming off either side, and then the branches have sub-branches coming off them, and they have little hooks that snap onto the other sub-branches. And those hooks and ridges you can see in this microscope image here. A feather is a tremendously complicated structure, not anything like a reptile scale. One can't evolve from the other. Now, sometimes you might hear that scientists have found feathered dinosaurs. Have you ever heard that claim before? Now, a lot of people believe this, but when you look at the evidence, it's not very strong. I went to this museum in New Mexico, and I took a picture of this dinosaur called an oviraptor, and look at the way they present it in the museum. It's a baby oviraptor, a type of dinosaur, and they showed him all covered in feathers. Does that mean that's what scientists actually found? No, because what does the sign say? In truth, people who study fossils have yet to uncover direct fossil evidence of an oviraptor with feathers. So why do they put feathers on him? Because that's what they discovered? Nope, it's because they believe birds came from dinosaurs. Even though they didn't find one with feathers, they still put feathers on him. Now, there are other examples. Here's a fossil that they say, this dinosaur, and it is a dinosaur, they say, look, it does have feathers. Not complex feathers like a bird, but just little bristly fibers. Do you see all along his head and his back and the top of his tail? Here's a zoom-in picture of those supposed feathers. Notice they don't have the complex branching pattern that I showed you and talked about. They just look like bristles or hairs. Is that really feathers? No. Other evolutionists say this is decaying skin and it forms these fibrous patterns. What it probably had, this dinosaur had something along his back like some lizards have today, like the basilisk, that can actually walk on water for a short distance. But look, all along his back is this fibrous branching skin pattern, not anything to do with feathers. You might also in school learn about this creature called Archaeopteryx. Archaeopteryx, they say, shows that birds came from dinosaurs because it has some dinosaur-like features. But the more scientists study Archaeopteryx, they realize this is not a half dinosaur, half bird. It's a fully formed bird. It could fly. It has feathers like a bird. It's one that has a long tail, a long bony tail, but that doesn't prove it's a dinosaur. It's not a dinosaur-like tail. It has claws on its wings. Oh, it has claws, so it's like a dinosaur. Yeah, but there are living birds today that have claws on their wings. That doesn't prove it's related to dinosaurs. It has so many clearly bird features. It has a bird-like lung that's not like dinosaur lungs. It has a perching foot for sitting down on a tree. Dinosaurs don't have a foot like that. It has a bird beak. It has a bird jaw that can open and close both the top and the bottom. Dinosaurs don't have a jaw like that. Even the skull and the canals in its ears help it to balance properly and recognize up and down, and dinosaurs have a different setup than this bird does. And so it's a true bird not related to dinosaurs. The bottom line is that this idea that birds came from dinosaurs, that's not going to fly, literally, right? Because birds were created separately from dinosaurs. All right, so that's about all I have. Let me just summarize what we've learned together in this hour as I wrap up here. If somebody says to you, do you believe in an age of dinosaurs? I suggest you say, no, I believe in 5 ages of dinosaurs. Let me spell them out for you. First, there was the age of design. When God first made the world, he made it very good. There was no death or disease. Dinosaurs lived in harmony at the same time as human beings. But then, after Adam and Eve disobeyed God, sin came into the world and death through sin. That brought the age of disaster. When Adam and Eve, their bodies began to deteriorate, eventually they would return to the dust, and even the animals began to devour one another and experience diseases and death as well. And then, because as people multiplied and mankind became so wicked, God said, I will send a global flood. Another word for flood is deluge, the age of the deluge, which buried many dinosaurs and turned their bodies into fossils. But dinosaurs, if they were around to become fossils, then Noah would have taken them aboard the ark. They lived until the age of disappearance, when after the flood they began to go extinct and finally were all gone. And last of all came the age of discovery, when we found dinosaur bones in the ground in modern times and reassembled them and put them in museums for everyone to see. So I hope I've convinced you that dinosaurs need not be a problem for Christians. In fact, dinosaurs are not our enemies, they are our friends. Right? Have you guys ever seen Barney? Any of the kids? I know the adults have. Yeah. Is it your total favorite? Barney's amazing, right? Oh, no, what? Okay.
Last year I seen a song from one of the shows in first grade. One of our songs was a gumdrop one.
Yeah.
And the kids who got to sing it wore a special scenery. They got umbrellas and walked.
Okay. Well, very good. I'm just making a joke with Barney. But the point is that dinosaurs are not a problem for Christians. And we can use them to teach truths about the gospel, right? Like, think of it this way. One thing we know about every dinosaur that's ever been discovered is that it is dead. And oh, I forgot, I was going to tell my favorite dinosaur joke. When I was speaking at a church one time, a boy came up to me and said, Mr. Halley, why can't dinosaurs clap? And I said, I don't know, why can't dinosaurs clap? And he said, because they're dead. So that's a good reason. Yep. Anyway, my favorite dinosaur joke. But the fact that dinosaurs are all dead today should remind us that something is wrong with the world. In one sense, the reason dinosaurs are dead is because Adam sinned, right? That's why death entered the world. And that points to our need for a Savior to make the world right again. And we needed Jesus to die on a cross to save us from our sins so that we could be forgiven for the bad things that we've done. And one day, because of the work of Jesus, God will make a new heavens and a new earth where there is no more death, no more pain, and God will wipe away every tear from our eyes. So dinosaurs can be a bridge to the gospel in just that way. Their death points to a problem with the world which is in need of a solution. So I know I'm going over my time a bit here. We have some fantastic resources if you guys all want to check them out in the book tables outside once we're done here. A magazine, I put the sign-up sheets for the Creation magazine in your seats there as well. You can just tear off one of these sign-up sheets, fill it out in detail, and then if you bring this to the book tables and pay for a magazine subscription, that will give you like a steady diet of creation answers. You can learn about dinosaurs and the many other questions that come up about, well, what about ape men? And what about changes in living things and adaptation and natural selection? And what about carbon dating? And what about light from distant stars that's billions of light years away? All these sorts of questions we answer as a ministry. And so this magazine is quarterly, comes out 4 times a year. I have the current issue of the magazine on the table, so if you do subscribe tonight, I'll give you your first issue that you can take home with you right away. It's no extra charge if you want to do the digital edition of the magazine. And for a 2-year subscription, the extra bonus is we throw in a free book as well, what the New Testament says about creation. Some other resources that we have out there deal with dinosaurs, like this one for aimed at middle school students. We have some for younger elementary age as well. This book is the most up-to-date resource we have on dinosaurs. It's more geared towards like college and adult level, but it's great for parents to be informed about these issues so that you can train your children as well. And this is the book that will debunk things like feathered dinosaurs and bird evolution and that sort of thing. Last but not least, we have a fantastic website I mentioned already, I believe, creation.com. You can get lots of articles and video content there as well. So I'll leave you with this final verse from the Psalms. It says, "O Lord, how manifold are your works. In wisdom have you made them all. The earth is full of your creatures." And once we understand by putting on our biblical glasses how dinosaurs do fit with the Bible, then we can give the Creator the glory for the things that he has made. Amen? All right. That's all I have. So thank you so much. Did you want to pray to close us, or I'll turn it back to you? All right.